Hey everybody, welcome to Algebra, section 9.6, the discriminant and the quadratic formula. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to find the value of the discriminant, use the value of the discriminant to determine how many solutions there are in a quadratic equation, and also use the quadratic formula to find both integer and non-integer answers. So let's talk about something called the discriminant. But before we do that, let's kind of recap where we've been. So this part of the chapter is all about solving quadratic equations. And we've learned that if there's no b term, then we can use square roots to solve it, which most of our quadratic equations do have b terms. So that's not like something that we can use all the time. We can use solve by graphing, but the only thing is solve by graphing works best if your answers turn out to be whole number answers. If they're fractions or decimals, it's kind of hard to pinpoint where they hit on the graph. We also learned about solving by factoring, which I think is the most efficient way to do it. If you can do it that way, then by all means do it. However, that also depends on the answers being whole numbers. So what we're going to talk about today, the quadratic formula, will work no matter what. Okay, so if you know this, you can do any quadratic equation. So it's best to know this because you can always fall back on it. Some of the other ones might be easy, a little bit more efficient, but this always works. So the first part of it, we're going to talk about something called the discriminant. And the discriminant is the phrase b squared minus 4ac. And what we're going to do, we've got three equations up here. We're going to use the discriminant we're going to use those equations to find the discriminant of each of those. Okay? So you should know what's the b term, what's the a term, what's the c term. So in the green equation, a is 1, b is negative 10, and c is negative 11. So let's go ahead and plug those in. So b squared minus 4ac. So I've got negative 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 11. Okay, so hopefully you see how I plugged those numbers in there. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and square that b squared. So when I square negative 10, I get positive 100. Because negative 10 times negative 10 is a positive 100. Anytime you do that b squared thing, you're going to find that the answer is positive. So I've still got the minus 4ac going on. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, when I do that, I consider that 4 a negative 4. So I'm going to do negative 4 times 1 times negative 11. And when I do, I get a positive 44. So I should get 100 plus 44. Then, of course, add those up and you get 144. Okay? So I just found the discriminant there, positive 144. Now, in a second, we're going to talk about why that's important. But right now, let's just focus on how we find the value of the discriminant. So the purple problem, A is 4, B is negative 12, and C is 9. So let's plug those in. Negative 12 squared minus 4 times 9. Negative 12 squared is a positive 144. And then I've still got the minus 4 times 9. So negative 4 times positive 4 is a negative 16. And negative 16 times 9 is a negative 144. So now I've got 144 minus 144, which, as you know, is 0. Okay? So that's the value of the discriminant on the purple problem. Let's just do this one more time. And I'm sure you're wondering, why is this important? Why do we even do this? We'll get to that. So for the blue problem, A is negative 4, B is negative 3, and C is negative 2. Plug all those in. Square that negative 3 first, and you get 9. Then I'll do negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 2. And negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. 16 times negative 2 is negative 32. So now I've got 9 minus 32, which makes negative 23. Okay? So the discriminant, why do we even bother finding that? You might even think, oh, discriminant, that sounds like discriminate. That's a bad word. Well, the word discriminate just means to categorize. Now, when we talk about race and stuff like that, that's a horrible thing to discriminate based off of that. But what we're doing with the discriminant in math is we're categorizing. What do we know about this problem based off of the value of the discriminant? So here's what you need to know. If your discriminant comes out to be positive, you know that there's going to be two real answers to the problem. Okay, so you might see the phrase b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0. That just means it's positive. Okay, so if it's positive, you're going to have two answers. And there's a visual representation of what that would look like. You know, we've had the graph come down and it hits at two places on the graph. Okay, that's a visual representation that we have two solutions. However, if the b squared minus 4ac equals 0, so the value of the discriminant is 0, exactly 0, then there's going to be one real solution. And we've seen visual representation of that before, a graph that comes down and just touches at one spot. Okay, it's rare, but it happens. However, if your discriminant is negative, that means you're going to have no real solutions. Okay, you might see it expressed as b squared minus 4ac is less than 0. Just means that the discriminant's negative. And a visual representation of that is where the parabola comes down and doesn't even touch the x-axis. Okay, so let's go back to those three problems. So in the green problem, we found out that our discriminant was a positive 144. So because it's a positive 144, I know that there's two solutions to that problem. On the purple problem, the discriminant turned out to be 0, so I know there's one solution to that problem. Whereas on the blue, the discriminant came out to be negative, so I know that there's no solutions to that problem. Okay, so still, why do we even bother doing that? Well, let's take a look at this problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out the discriminant first, and once I figure out the discriminant, I'm going to figure out how many solutions there are. Because if there's no solutions, there's no problem, there's no point in doing the entire problem. So here's what I'm going to do. My A is 1, my B is negative 3, and my C is negative 12. So plug those into b squared minus 4ac. So I get negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 12. The negative 3 squared is 9. And then if I do the negative 4 times 1 times negative 12, that's a positive 48. So now I've got 9 plus 48, which is 57. Okay, so that's a positive 57, so I know that there's going to be two solutions. Okay, so I know from this point, I can go on with the problem. I know how to do it, or I don't know how to do it yet, but I know that there will be two solutions, so it's worth my time to keep going and figure out what those two solutions are. Okay, now take a look at that 57. That's going to come back around a little bit later. Okay, but right now I'm going to show you how to do this because our answer to this is not going to be whole numbers. It's going to be decimals. So I'm going to show you how to find the solution to this problem by using the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula, quite simply, if you're taking notes, write this down. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? Hope you got that. If not, just rewind the video, slow it down a little bit. But here it is again. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Let me give you a visual on that. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Hopefully that b squared minus 4ac looks familiar. All right. And that whole thing is over 2a. Now this is the formula that you're going to use anytime you don't know how to solve a quadratic equation. You can use this, plug the numbers in, work it out, and it works every single time. Okay? So let's go ahead and go back to that same problem that we were just doing. We know that there's going to be two solutions. So I'm going to use the fact that my A is 1, my B is negative 3, and my C is negative 12. And I'm going to go ahead and plug those numbers into the quadratic formula. So there it is, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all of that over 2a. So I plug those numbers in, and since my b value is negative, I now have a negative 3, because the original problem says negative b. So I have a negative 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 12. And that whole mess is over 2 times 1. All right? So let's start working this out. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. Where do we even start to work this out? I would say start working underneath the square root. So I'm going to deal with this negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 12. So when I do that, the negative 3 squared is a positive 9. So that's all I have right now is just I change that negative 3 squared into a positive 9. Now, if I do the negative 4 times 1 times negative 12, that's a positive 48. So the negative 3 squared turned into 9. The negative 4 times 1 times negative 12 turned into a positive 48. And of course, 9 plus 48. Okay, let's go ahead. I'm running out of room here, so let's clear out that top part, and let's take this and let's move it up. And now the 9 plus 48 makes 57. Okay, so as of right now, I have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 57 over 2 times 1. So all I did was kind of figure out what was underneath the square root. And notice that 57, that's the same 57 from our discriminant. So here's a little heads up, okay? A little secret I don't let everyone in on. Okay, so maybe I do. But anytime that you've already figured out the discriminant, that's going to be the exact same thing as what's underneath the square root. So really, we just did a lot of extra work for nothing. Okay, we knew that that b squared minus 4ac was going to be 57. Okay, so let's go ahead and take that. Let's bump it on up. Where do we go from there? Well, let's go ahead and clean it up a little bit. A negative 3 is a positive 3. So that negative 3 just turned into a positive 3 there. And then 2 times 1 is just 2. So now we've got 3 plus or minus the square root of 57 over 2. So the next thing to do is let's go ahead and figure out what is the square root of 57. So let's make a little room, bump it up. If I grab my calculator and plug it in, the square root of 57 is roughly 7.55. So now I've got 3 plus or minus 7.55 over 2. Now, you might be wondering, what's up with this plus or minus thing? Well, you remember when we start talking about this, we know there's going to be 2 solutions. So here's how it's going to work. Let's go ahead and bump that up. The plus or minus part of it is what gives us the 2 solutions. So I'm going to take that plus or minus and split it up into 2 equations. So I'm going to do 3 plus 7.55 over 2 and 3 minus 7.55 over 2. Okay? That's how we get our 2 equations, is the plus or minus, once we're ready for it, splits it up into 2 separate equations. So let's go ahead and work this on out. So move that up. 3 plus 7.55 makes 10.55. 3 minus 7.55 makes negative 4.55. And those are both over 2. So let's move those up and divide those by 2. And I get 5.275 and negative 2.275. So those are my 2 answers. Okay, and let's go ahead and round those. My rule of thumb is rounding 2 places. So my 2 answers are 5.28 and negative 2.28. Okay, and that's how you use the quadratic formula. Now, I imagine a lot of this just went right over some people's head. So let's go ahead and do a few more examples and see if we can solidify this a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this equation. 3x squared plus 5x equals 2. Now, problem that I see right off the bat is this equation only works if everything's on one side and 0 on the other. So I don't have 0 on the other side, so I need to get rid of that 2, move it to the other side, and then we can start this problem. So if I subtract the 2, I get 3x squared plus 5x minus 2 equals 0. So don't start using the quadratic formula until you get it in that format where everything's on one side, 0's on the other. So now I know that my a value is 3, my b value is 5, and my c value is negative 2. So let's plug those values into that equation. So I get x equals -5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4. My a value is 3. My b value, or my c value, is -2. Over 2 times a, and my a value is 3. Okay, so there I have everything nice and plugged in. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And let's go ahead and work underneath the square root. So the first thing I'm going to do is the 5 squared is 25. And then I can also do the -4 times 3 times -2. So that's -12 times -2 is a positive 24 over 2 times 3. Okay, so again, when you're using the quadratic formula, focus underneath the square root to start off with. So -5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 24 is 49. And so the square root's all done. Let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. So the square root of 49, I can actually do that. That's just 7. And 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, not too bad so far. All right, now a common mistake a lot of people make is that they say, okay, square root of 49, that's 7. And so then they write this. -5 plus or minus the square root of 7. Don't put that square root back there, okay? You already used the square root when you went from 49 to 7, okay? So at this point, we should not have that square root on there. However, at this point, this is where we should split it up into 2 points, or into 2 problems. So once you've found the square root, once you've cleaned up any unnecessary stuff like the -b or the 2 times a, this is where it splits up. So it's going to split up into -5 plus 7 over 6 and -5 minus 7 over 6. Okay, so that's where the plus or minus part comes in. Make one of them a plus sign in the middle, make the other one a minus sign in the middle. And then let's work it from there. So -5 plus 7 is a positive 2. A -5 minus 7 is a -12. And so 2 over 6 just reduces to 1/3. And -12 over 6 is a -2. So those are my 2 answers, 1/3 and -2. Okay? Let's move on to the next problem. Okay, so I got a lot of stuff going on here. Mostly the thing that I see is the x squared and that -3 are on the other side. So let's bring those back to this side. So let's subtract the x squared from both sides. And let's add 3 to both sides. So 7x squared minus x squared, that's going to be 6x squared. That minus 3x just comes on down. And 4 plus 3 is 7. Okay, there we go. So now this problem looks a little sketch to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if this problem's even worth getting into. All right? I'm going to use the discriminant and determine how many answers there are. So let me change colors here. So the discriminant, as you should know, is b squared minus 4ac. So I get -3 squared minus 4 times 6 times 7. Okay? So -3 squared is a positive 9. -4 times 6, that's -24. And -24 times 7, that's going to be negative 168, I think. So then 9 minus 168, that's going to be a negative 159. And that's the value of my discriminant. Now, here's the thing. Because the discriminant is negative, I know there's going to be no real solutions. So here's where the discriminant pays off. There's no point in doing any more work. I already know there's going to be no solution. So let's just move on to the next problem. Okay, so this one, there's nothing on the other side. There's 0 there. So that's good. I don't have to do any preliminary work. I do know my A value is 9. My B value is 30. My C value is 25. So again, this problem looks kind of suspect to me. So I'm going to go ahead and use the discriminant to see if it's even worth doing. So if I do B squared minus 4AC, I get 30 squared minus 4 times 9 times 25. 30 squared is 900. And then, let's see, let's be smart about how we multiply this. Negative 4 times 25 is negative 100. And then negative 100 times 9 is negative 900. So I get 900 minus 900, which of course is 0. So what I know is that because my discriminant is 0, that means that I'm going to have one solution to this problem. Okay? So because I have a solution, I need to go ahead and work it on out and finish it. So let me grab a different color. Let's start at the beginning. Let's plug everything into b squared, or sorry, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So a negative b, that's going to be a negative 30. And then b squared minus 4ac, shortcut time. I've already done b squared minus 4ac. I know the answer to that comes out to be 0. So I'm just going to take that same 0 from over there and plug it in. And then all of that is over 2 times 9. So I always advise you do what's underneath the square root first. In this case, it turned out to be 0. So let's go ahead and clean it up a little bit. Negative 30 just stays negative 30. Square root of 0 is 0. And 2 times 9 is 18. Okay? Now it's at this point that we split it up into 2 separate problems. We do the plus and the minus. However, since it's plus or minus 0, negative 30 plus 0 is the same thing as negative 30 minus 0. It's just going to be negative 30 over 18, which each of those can reduce by 6. So I get negative 5/3. And that's my one single answer. So the quadratic formula can be a little bit daunting. I realize that. It's very step heavy. But for those of you who like to just plug numbers in and go with it, this is perfect for you. Okay? And the great thing is this works every time. So I would venture to say that we all need a little bit more practice on this. But if you guys have any more questions, please feel free to ask me in class or email me, and I'd be glad to help you. Hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see you real soon.